I have mentioned before on this channel the controversial opinion of mine that recruiting is one of the most, if not the most, overrated mechanism in the sport of college football. Now, 24/7 Sports, On3, ESPN, Rivals, or any recruiting website imaginable will disagree with that take, along with many college football fans and analysts, and understandably so. Dylan Raiola, yesterday, true freshman quarterback. In Nebraska's spring game, he looked awesome in the short, intermediate, and deep ball. He made great decisions. He even made some mistakes like fumbling the football, but he fell on it immediately. He's a great decision maker, very mature for his age, both physically, mentally. We even got to see him use his legs, and he commanded the first and second string offense pretty well. I think he did a good job. He's an example of why recruiting is important. That's not what I'm denying. Rather, what I'm exposing is the fact that whether it's Miami, whether it's Texas, whether it's Oklahoma in some seasons, whether it's Clemson right now, or whether it's past Ole Miss teams, maybe Ole Miss in the present if Lane Kiffin doesn't make that next jump, whether it's Penn State, whether it is Ohio State the previous few seasons under Ryan Day, you will not win a national championship, and you will not win your conference, particularly in the Big Ten or the SEC, and I'd even say the Big 12 because no team in the Big 12 is an elite recruiter. You will not win great things. You will not achieve at a high level if you do not have elite, great at worst, near elite, like in that range, top 25, top 15, especially top 10, top 5, strength and conditioning programs, offensive and defensive staffs, assistant coaches, a great head coach, and a great culture that is instilled by the captains, the leaders on the roster, and also the entire coaching staff. If you have great talent, if you recruit well, but you do not have those things that I mentioned, nothing will happen. Meanwhile, you can have 3 stars and maybe just a handful of 4 stars, and if you have a great staff and great culture, you can achieve at a high level. You probably won't win a national championship, but you can win your conference. You can go on a Cinderella run, and you can be consistently better than those teams that have all the talent in the world but suck at coaching and have trash decision-making. Look at Scott Frost, for example. Commanded the most talented team in the Big Ten West. And what did he do with it? Nothing. Nothing. Didn't even make a bowl game. Meanwhile, Kirk Ferentz, with an inferior roster by recruiting rankings, was sniping him every time they met up and just painfully coming so close to losing, and to give Scott Frost a win. In some years, a win that would have brought them to bowl eligibility, the Cornhuskers. But Ferentz, because he was the better coach, because he had the better staff, the better culture, outsmarted and beat Scott Frost every single time. Nebraska right now has a great roster, a roster that is improving as their recruiting is gaining momentum and as their staff is developing these players. And they also have a great strength and conditioning program, as showcased by the fact that last year they were a physical team. And in this spring game, they had a back and forth battle in the trenches with, I think, great balance. And they have position coaches that do a darn good job of recruiting and developing their rooms. The receivers, the tight ends, the running backs, quarterbacks, the O-line. The entire offense is ahead of where it was by miles this time last year, and miles ahead of where it was in their final game of the regular season against Iowa. Spring games are not the end-all be-all, and I'm not here to tell you that, but this spring game was impressive, and relative to expectations, this was one of the more impressive spring games that I have seen in the Big Ten, that I have watched. Does Nebraska look like Oregon or Michigan or Ohio State or even Penn State? I don't think so. No. But they look like they are on an upward trajectory, and dare I say an exponentially upward trajectory. Raiola looks like if he plays to his ceiling, he can contend to be the best quarterback in the Big Ten as a true freshman, which is pretty insane. Heinrich Haarberg Looks good. Looks like an actual dual threat quarterback, not just a running back who has an occasional ability to throw. And Daniel Kalen looks good too. Nebraska's great depth at quarterback. Quarterback might be the strength of this offense when it was its never-ending supply of kryptonite last season. The offensive line, especially on the interior with Mazkua and also Ben Scott at center, is impressive, opening up holes and always being on their man and being disciplined. Dante Dowdle is a beast at running back, and if Ramir Johnson and Gabe Irvin Jr. can stay healthy, those two, combined with Dowdle and Johnson, that creates depth at running back. And the receivers looked great as well. And defensively, I'm not talking about them as much because there were injuries and also players, several starters who didn't play. So there's not much to take away from defensively as much as there is offensively. But the defense still had moments, despite mostly playing depth pieces and second stringers from what I can tell. So the defense is deep. The defense we knew last year was great. This year will likely be great. The question entering the 2024 season for Nebraska is the offense. And there were several encouraging moments in this spring game offensively, things that you want to see if you're a Husker fan. The quarterback room is the biggest area for takeaways here, by far. They look superior in every way to the 2023 room. Haarberg still looks like a beast on the ground. He's making accurate deep ball throws, accurate intermediate throws. He doesn't have the same ceiling as a passer that Raiola does. But my goodness, you put him behind a great O-line and a great running back room. This is something that Corn Crazed mentioned in his live reaction to the spring game. With his legs, he's deadly. And I think that you're going to be seeing him, whether it's in wildcat formations or designed run packages, or heck, maybe even he's competitive enough for the job that they play him and Raiola early in the season to see which quarterback gives them a better shot to win. Who knows? But you're going to be seeing multiple quarterbacks, I think, this year. I think Raiola is still obviously the front runner to start, but like with what Michigan did with Alex Orji, it's easy for me to say because I'm a Michigan fan, but Ohio State also did it with Devin Brown. Penn State did it with Bo Pribula. Those three teams had their main starters, and then for some designed run plays, especially because of injuries to McCarthy, because Aller just isn't fast and nimble as a scrambler. He's basically a QB sneak, short yard scrambler expert, but he can't do much else than that. And McCord had no legs. Those three teams, the big three in the Big Ten, used backups, used players that were nowhere near their starters in terms of capability, whether that was due to injuries or due to talent or development in design run packages as wrinkles to help confuse opposing defenses. And I think you're going to see Nebraska see that, or do that, pardon me, at minimum this season. Blocking. This is another area, and this is what gets me excited. I'm watching wide receivers and offensive linemen and tight ends just throwing, like tossing defensive players as Nebraska running backs are breaking free. Dowdle going to the end zone on that long run. Other running backs getting a share of the pie. The offense looks just so much better than where it was last season. So much better. Tight end has quality depth with Borkacher, Fedoni, and also true freshman Carter Nelson. The receivers, I was impressed with them. We got to see some of Isaiah Nair and also Jamal Banks just a little bit. But Jalen Lloyd was a big standout, and that's good to see. I think him and Malachi Coleman, now being in their second year with the program, are going to see great strides forward. And again, that offensive line, they're big, they're physical, they were good in pass protection, they were even better in run blocking. I was just overall impressed with this offensive unit from yesterday's spring game on April 27th. The Cornhuskers offense in the spring game, just comparing them to the defense, they looked ahead of the defense. Obviously, it's due to the fact that the defense had several injuries and many starters that didn't play. I think that the offense is destined to take big steps forward this coming season. And I have more thoughts on them that I'll share at the end of the video, so make sure to stick around for the whole thing. But I want to talk about the defense before moving on to the season outlook and my reaction to the spring game as it applies to the whole team. Before we do that, I want to encourage you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more college football content. Thank you to my patrons for sponsoring this video and channel. And if you want to support the channel outside of liking the video, subscribing to the channel, sharing it around to other Nebraska fans or college football fans, go Big Red, by the way, you can support my channel and my work here by subscribing to my Patreon as an all-conference, all-American, or Heisman member, or you can visit the link down in the description below and at the top of the pinned comment, the same place where I have my links to my Patreon page, and you can visit my merchandise store and purchase College Football with Sam merchandise. Thank you all so much for watching and for subscribing and for commenting your reaction to this spring game down in the comment section below and for listening this far. Now let's get back to it. Nebraska's defense, a little bit of, I'd say, an awkward transition, but I guess you could say the performance of the defense yesterday was sort of awkward in a way. I didn't realize until the final few minutes of the highlight package and watching some other Nebraska content, including Corn Crazed, and looking at just reading articles online and looking at the analysis of the game, that there were several starters out. And yet this defense, I think, still produced great play in the trenches defensively, getting tackles for loss, getting penetration, getting some key stops on fourth down, which was impressive, making the quarterbacks uncomfortable and executing in coverage, making some key pass breakups. This unit's strength, I think, is still going to be its front. The defensive front is where most of the players, most of the starters were out, and yet that was still the strongest unit because the defensive backs got torched a few times, whether it was on the deep passes for touchdowns by Raiola and Haarberg, whether it was a few intermediate passes, or even a pass to, I forget if it was Fedoni or Carter Nelson out of the backfield. It was a tight end pass out of the backfield that went for, I think, 20 or 30 yards. Big plays like that. There were also some tackles that were broken by running backs, and most of those broken tackles were the victims of those were the secondary players that were trying to make the tackles. So I think the front, the defensive line, especially the defensive tackles with Nash Hutmacher, the defensive tackles, ends, linebackers, that's going to be the strength of this defense. Defensive back might be a weakness. I know Bly Hill went down, and it looked like he was going to be a starter. Prayers up to him. Hopefully he can heal very quickly. But you still have Tommy Hill, you have Deshaun Singleton, Isaac Gifford, Malcolm Hartzog, Kobe Bretz. You have Marquise Buford Jr. I mean, there are players in this secondary. There isn't a ton of depth there, and there is some inconsistent play, but there are high-ceiling players, all Big Ten caliber players, especially in corner Tommy Hill on this defense. And Tony White returning along with his defensive staff, there's a theme with this Nebraska team, and there's a theme with Matt Rule overall that I sense is continuity. Matt Rule talking about how everyone wanted Fedoni to leave Nebraska, all these other schools contacting him and offering him deals, and he stayed home. And the fact that Nebraska right now doesn't have too many players transferring out. I mean, Chubba Purdy and Jeff Sims transferred out, but Jeff Sims has not found another home, and that's because he's just not a good quarterback. And I don't know where Chubba Purdy transferred to, but he transferred because we all suspected that he was not going to be beating out Dylan Raiola. It obviously hurt for depth reasons, but now looking at the spring game, you kind of wonder how much did it hurt, because the quarterbacks all look good. Kalen's clearly I would say the worst, but he's not even bad. He looks like a quality backup and could be a quality starter in the system that Nebraska has, and then Haarberg and Raiola look good. And defensively, there aren't many, if any, key transfers that are leaving. and they're returning a boatload of their production, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They have so many starters coming back. And MJ Sherman, Nash Hutmacher, those are just an example of two key players that didn't play yesterday, and there were many more. They're gonna be a big impact for the Cornhuskers this upcoming season. They're gonna have a massive, massive impact. This defense was great last year, good last year. I expect it to still improve entering this season. I'm curious to see if they statistically improve or regress, because they will be facing, on average, better offensive opponents. Last year, Nebraska's defense really only faced one consistent, near elite or higher offense, and that was Michigan's. And Michigan's offense just destroyed that defense like it was nothing. So there's an argument to be made that part of Nebraska's success on defense last season was because of how bad the offenses in the Big Ten were. But I think that's an unfair argument, in the same way that it would be unfair to say Nebraska's defense was like top 10 last year. Their offense was just so bad that the defense had no other option but to break. That would be unfair too, because you look at Iowa's defense, who played with an even worse offense compared to Nebraska's, or at least a similar caliber offense, and their defense was so much better. I mean, just way, way better. And there are other past Iowa units, or even some past like Michigan defenses in 2017, for example, that prove that point. This defense was not a top 10 unit last year. It very well could be this season, and they have depth, as shown by the fact that they had multiple starters out and still played well, especially in the second half, where they pretty much stalled Nebraska's offense. So the defensive line, I was impressed with their play, getting tackles for loss. At defensive back, it's key that Nebraska can stay healthy, and maybe with the injuries they sustain, they could add some depth through the transfer portal. I know that Takario, I believe his name's Takario Davis from Arizona, he still has yet to find a place to land. Jacoby Matthews from Texas A&M. There are a few players that Nebraska may want to consider adding through the portal just for extra depth, and I know that Nebraska has the funds and the donors and the type of culture to attract a good player to their program. Lastly, I want to talk about just how I incorporate this spring game and what I saw, because spring games, again, they are not the end-all be-all, but they do tell you something. If Michigan, my team, for example, threw like 5 interceptions in their spring game, and the secondary was very thin, then I would know, okay, this passing offense is going to suck. We're just better off running a triple option. Obviously, that's full of sarcasm and exaggeration, but you get the point. There are things that you can take away, for sure, especially with Nebraska, where they return so much of their production and staff that there isn't much that's new outside of some incoming transfers and true freshmen that are going to make an impact. There are plenty of knowns for Nebraska, plenty of them. For a team like Michigan, for example, who replaces much of their staff and much of their roster, there are more unknowns. It's similar with USC, for example, who will actually play Nebraska. Nebraska avoids Michigan. They also avoid Penn State. They avoid Oregon. Their schedule outside of a road trip to Ohio State is pretty easy. But before we roughly break down the schedule, they return 77% of their production, and Nebraska's top 40 in S&P Plus rankings provided by Bill Connolly. These are very accurate rankings. I expect Nebraska to be top 40 in ESPN's FPI. They will be projected to go bowling. I mean, everyone will expect this Nebraska team, mostly everyone, or at least most analysts will expect this team to go bowling given the schedule and what they return. Rule has retained most of his staff, so on the roster, on the field, off the field, this team does have elite continuity. And the offense is miles ahead of the 2023 unit. And the defense, playing all those second stringers and depth pieces in the spring game is only going to help the depth grow. And I think that there's a chance that this defense, outside of the secondary where there isn't as much depth, but you can have rotations at linebacker and defensive line, and the average level of play won't suffer too much, which is good. They can keep their players healthy. That way, Tony White can keep everyone rested, playing at high capacity, and that will help the defense improve their endurance and to have more in the reserves. So if the offense is having a tough day, or if the starters on defense are hurt or not having a good day themselves, they can get in fresh blood and fresh players and rebound. Nebraska's biggest strength, this almost sounds like heresy, but I think it will be their quarterback room now and their defensive end and defensive tackle rooms, just on the offense and then on the defense. And this might be a team where when I go through and finalize potential power and also redo my unit rankings for the Big Ten that I released in my Big Ten predictions video, the quarterback room might rapidly, in fact, it probably will improve and level up by several letter grades, in my opinion. I was very impressed with what I saw from Raiola and even from Heinrich Haarberg. I mean, he looks like he could actually start for Nebraska this season. I don't think he will. I do think Raiola probably puts them in a better position to win, but he could start, I think, given his tools with his legs, his skill sets there, and the fact that his throwing motion, his accuracy, his release is so much better compared to what it was last season. I don't think that defenses could easily shut him down anymore. It would be harder, I think, to stop Raiola, especially with the improvements Nebraska has had at receiver and pass blocking. But Heinrich Haarberg, he now has an ability to pass the football in anywhere on the field that is at least respectable. And that combined with his legs and power running and efficient scrambling, I think can do a lot for the Cornhuskers. They're a very physical team. What will determine their ceiling is Raiola's play, or maybe if Heinrich Haarberg starts, which again, doubtful, but whoever starts at quarterback, most likely Raiola, that's what will determine their ceiling because the supporting cast is good. Maybe outside of quarterback, a player like Isaiah Nair, how will he rebound from his injuries at Texas if he plays at his ceiling, like the type of receiver that he was at Wyoming? That could help determine this team's ceiling. But the supporting cast, the trench play is good. And Nebraska has the tools. Dare I say this? I think they have the tools and the talent to potentially compete for a college football playoff spot, given their schedule. And speaking of their schedule, let's look at it very quickly. They play UTEP August 31st, Colorado September 7th, Northern Iowa September 14th, Illinois September 21st, and have their first road game of the year at Purdue September 28th. They host Rutgers October 5th. Then they have a bye week, and they play at Indiana October 19th after that bye week, at Ohio State October 26th, and they host UCLA November 2nd. They have a bye week again before traveling to USC November 16th. They play Wisconsin at home November 23rd, and they finish the season at Iowa on November 29th. Ladies and gentlemen, Cornhusker fans, Wolverine, Buckeye, Penn State, Nittany Lion, Hawkeye, any college football fan out there, there's a chance that Nebraska's favored in 11 out of 12 regular season games. I mean, they could be favored over USC, even though it's on the road and even though USC has more talent than them, if USC plays close to their floor. Ohio State, I would pencil in as a loss, but any other game I'd say is winnable. Either Nebraska will be an underdog that has a shot to pull off an upset, or they will be the favorite. They need to win 8+ games this season, including their bowl game, which I have them doing just barely with an 8-5 record, but I have them meeting that expectation. And I think that starts with a win over Colorado. They have to win that game. A loss to Colorado, the season's not a failure. It's early. I think that Colorado has several advantages over Nebraska that most Big Ten teams don't. An explosive receiver core, a good quarterback, and unknowns as well. Colorado has so many unknowns both on film and their roster that they will be hard to study. I think that Colorado's best bet to have success this year is for them to win all of their early games. And then when people start to figure them out, they at least have enough momentum and enough of a cushion to continue to push forward. Nebraska is something similar, except it's not in terms of unknowns on their roster and the fact that they have new coordinators and a new roster, so teams won't know how to prepare for them or what to expect. It's the fact that their schedule starts out early. I mean, Nebraska could be bowl eligible by that first bye week, and then they could be undefeated entering that Ohio State game. They could be, and that's not unrealistic at all. They need 8 or more wins this year, including that bowl game. And they need to, I think, contend for a top 25 spot at some point this season. That win over Colorado is absolutely necessary, because a loss to Colorado means that games against Purdue, even Illinois, Rutgers, eventually at Indiana after the bye, those are spots of vulnerability, honestly. I mean, a loss to Colorado with how Colorado's roster looks right now, the fact that it's a home game as well, means that teams that have decent skill position play, and teams on the road in particular, who are likely going to be more physical than Colorado in the trenches, all of a sudden look like a challenge. So that's my opinion. I think that the spring game was a great look at the Cornhuskers entering the season, very encouraging, and that's all I have to say in this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I want to give a shout out to Crash2488 for sponsoring this video as a Heisman patron. For Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and Connor Little OH, thank you for being an All-American patron and sponsoring this channel and video. And thanks to Will Loftus, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for sponsoring this video as all conference patrons. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.